Um, Other than that, thank you for the Kentville Volunteer Fire Department for helping this get set up tonight. And working through minor technical glitches, but that, are we good from the
Good to go.
recording?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Lindsay Young is helping out with the. Go ahead, Lance.
Yeah, okay. So, hello, yeah, Ben, Development Officer for the Town of Kentville. Okay, so welcome to the public participation meeting. And this is because the town received a application to enter into a development agreement from VIDA Living, as we have Elizabeth represented. And my part of the presentation, or what I will be presenting, is more the policy, regulation, and process. And then I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth, who's going to go more into the actual development itself, so like renderings and a good visualization of what it is. But first, you have to get through this.
Can you speak up just a little bit, Ben?
Yeah, actually, here I can just use the mic even.
You want the stand? You want the mic stand, or you just gonna hold it? That's a skill.
Switch up the green, press the button on the bottom until it goes green, I think.
Yeah, it's not turning green. There you go.
Hello.
There you go. Okay, so purpose of this meeting is simply to get input from the public. So this is very, very early on in the whole application process, which I will explain further down. But this is really just to throw it out to the public and have discussions, hear comments, all that stuff. So that is truly the purpose of this meeting. The location of the subject property is off of Hartlen Court. Next slide, I do have a map, just so you can see, but it is off of Hartlen Court. But what's interesting about this one is that the town boundary actually cuts right across the property. So what we will be doing is, because we only have legislation within the town of Kentville, so we will be discussing only on the portion within the town boundary. However, as a whole, it is a development for 56 residential units. However, about 25 will be within the town, and that is what this development agreement, and I'm going to call it a DA. Moving on. So that's what this DA is specifically about. So yeah, so here's the map. Actually, this is great because I can just do this. So here's Bridge Street. This is where it sections off. Nichols Avenue or Eldershot, Foodland, so we're talking northern. And so here's a pink line. That is the town boundary. So the whole parcel actually goes above, but it cuts right through. So this DA is, again, only going to be focusing on what is highlighted in purple. But here is a good representation of where it is.
Where's the pink line, Ben?
So here.
Oh, I see.
And that is the town boundary.
Okay, gotcha.
Right? So I can't jump that high, but the whole parcel goes up like that, and the town boundary cuts right through. So what is a DA? A DA is an agreement that is registered to the property, and it's an agreement between the town and the applicant. The purpose of this is that it addresses specific details regarding the design and use of a proposed development. The development agreement process allows council to consider the unique opportunities and constraints facing each development proposal on a case-by-case basis. So in plain language, let's say, pretty much what it is that it's an agreement where the town and applicant almost create their own little land use bylaw specifically for that property, because every development's different, the neighborhood's different, so the needs and wants and everything's different. So there's this agreement that is drafted and agreed upon between the town and the applicant specifically for that one property. So it's binding, it is registered to that property. And that's what we're doing. Okay, so obviously we can't just enter into development agreements just because we want to. There has to be regulation, there has to be policy that guides it. So starting with the big guns, the MGA, section 230, there is language that provides the legislative authority for council to consider the adoption of a DA by policy. What policy, you ask? Great question.
I think your mic guy wants to change the batteries for
Oh,
you.
sorry. I'll just wait.
Sorry. Never fails, right?
Thank you.
Usually you do. Yeah.
Now, I see what you had for troubles.
Well, you just didn't turn it around.
That's,
You can just project
Yeah,
from your
nice and
lower
loud.
belly. It's called the diaphragm.
I'm very happy to
You keep going on, keep working
do
here.
that.
You want me to do slides?
That's how I run the boxes. I dumped them out of a brand new box. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that.
Hello. There you go. Cool. Okay, resume. Right, so the MGA says that there's legislative authority for council to enter into a DA upon policy. In the MPS, Municipal Plan and Strategy, there is policy. So policy GD5 is the enabling policy to be considered for this application. And what the language says, and we're gonna dissect this a little bit. This policy provides council with the ability to consider the development of a multi-unit dwelling community constructed on multiple adjoining lots or a single lot within the R4 zone by DA. So as you see, there are a couple of criteria that need to be met, and that is what I'm gonna go through. So that was the enabling policy. So that was the policy that says, okay, you can enter it. However, there's further policy that needs to be implemented as well. So there's policy IM 11. This is the general criteria that any DA that you enter has to have this revision, has to review, staff has to review all the enabling general criteria. And this obviously will be done after this, which again is part of the process, which I'll explain after. And then the next policy right after, policy item 12. So after there's a full review of all those general criteria, this allows council to request or require further information if they consider pertinent to the development process. So once a full review of the enabling criteria are done and council's content, perfect. But there is policy that allows them to request further. And I do have all the policies at the very, very end. I'm not gonna go through everything, but you'll have a good idea of what has to be revised or reviewed. And then last but not least, the LUB, section 5.5.2, further language that enables to enter into a development agreement. And this is saying in compliance with the MGA, which I mentioned, and policies IM 10, which is the application policy. So it's just to ensure that the application is complete, that it has all the right plans, forms, all that. So it's a complete application, and then IM 11, again, general criteria. And I'm going to go through that definition. However, so multi-unit dwelling community, that was part of the requirement. However, this definition is not defined in any of our documents. So it's pretty difficult to know whether this development actually is a multi-unit dwelling community because there's no definition. However, staff, we therefore just created our own definition. And this is going to be considered into the development agreement, but this is just proposed. So multi-unit dwelling community. First paragraph tackles the multi-unit dwelling part. So it's a development consistent of 2 or more residential units on a single parcel of land, or multiple, designed to accommodate multiple households. So there we go, multiple unit dwelling. Now community, these units may be arranged in various configurations and must include shared amenities such as parking, green space, recreational facilities, or other common areas. So there you will have a sense of a community. So multi-unit dwelling, community.
You just said that that's not in any legislation or anything right now.
Correct. So we created that definition, and again, it's considered. So this is only approved once council approves it. It can be altered, it can be changed, but to move things forward, we created this because we felt it was appropriate for this DA. Yes, actually that's a very good point. So this policy, policy GD5, the enabling policy, this was actually just in effect October. So this is actually the first DA application that the new policy takes into effect. So it is a new policy, so there are still some things to figure out, and this would be one of them, is to actually implement a official definition in the land use bylaw.
So is this gonna be in the land use bylaw before this development is given a green light or not?
Not before, but hopefully it goes and it will in the future, so that any proceeding or any potential development agreement application, then there would be.
So it doesn't apply to this one?
Well, we're gonna put this directly in the development agreement itself.
So this definition is gonna go into this development agreement document, but not necessarily be the language that goes into the LUB yet.
Correct.
Thank you.
And if it's proven that this is an acceptable definition, then moving forward, then
Maybe
hope
we move it over into the LUB.
you got it. You got it.
But presumably the definition just didn't come,
It didn't exist.
no, but didn't just come out of the air. I mean, you probably
No, we
chatted with other municipalities, et cetera,
correct.
to create.
Well, yes, and we did revision and we looked at else and other planning documents
Right,
and,
okay.
and then, yes, we didn't, it was
Yeah.
like a 2-minute
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
AI.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a precedent for it.
Sorry, Kate.
Okay, so the first part was that it had to be a multi-unit dwelling community, got that definition. The second was that it had to be in the R4 zone. This is the generalized future land use map, not the zoning map, we'll get to that. But I still think this is quite important to show because it is designated residential. So even though it's more dense than your average R2, R3, R4, it is designated residential. So the intended future use of this property is residential, right? So, but here we go. This is the zoning map and brown R4. So it is zoned R4. And what's also important to notice, but this was part of the review, are adjacent neighborhoods and properties. And as you see, there's also quite a bit of R4 zones as well. So something consider as well. So, right, okay, so before, oh, we can go into this, but there we go. So multi-unit dwelling community, and it's on one or adjacent lots, and it's zoned R4. So check, check, check. We can officially enter. So this is the proposed site plan. I am going to skip most of this because we have Elizabeth here, who will go into more detail. I will just highlight big things. So there's the dotted line. So that is the town boundary. So we are focusing on what's down here. That is the County of Kings. But what to notice is that there is a shared green space in the middle. There's a pickleball court. And the driveway, so it's going off of Hartlen, and then this is Oak Dean, but there's gonna be a driveway that goes through the whole development. So that's gonna be enter and exit, ingress, egress. But that's all I'm gonna say for now, and then the details will come from Elizabeth. These are, okay, so I guess I can go back. So these are all individual units, single units. It's not all gonna be the exact same. You're gonna have a variety of different styles as well. Again, I'll leave this more with Elizabeth. So, as mentioned, a DA is sort of like you're writing your own little land use bylaw. There are 3 specific regulations that will be considered. One, in the LUB, you are allowed multiple units on in the R4 zone. And as we saw, there was quite a few on that property. However, there needs to be a minimum of 20 feet between buildings. In this proposal, in order to achieve that density and that design, a revision would have to be done to that regulation. Another one, the rear yard setback in the land use bylaw in the R4 zone, it's 15 feet. Again, to accommodate that density and that development, that would also be considered to change. And then amenity space. So once you have more than 4 residential units, then amenity space is required. However, in the site plan, we saw that most of the amenity space was actually in the county's side. So if you look at it as a whole, there is enough amenity space. But if we were to look at only the LUB and only within the town of Kentville, well, it doesn't meet it. So that will also be addressed and explained in the DA. Other than that, yeah, it's just those 3. Okay, so here's the process, and then almost done. January 13th, this application was introduced to CAC, the Council Advisory Committee. And this was just thrown out there saying that, okay, this is the process, you know, no big conversations or anything. It was just saying, okay, this is what's happening. So really, the public participation meeting, which is today, right now, this is sort of like the first step in this process. So this is, again, just throwing it out there, and then we hear back from the public. After that, once we get all the information, then that full review of those general enabling policies, policy item 11, will be conducted, and the development itself will be drafted. So once there's a staff report, the review, and the DA, this then goes to CAC for their review. And then they are the ones who say, cool, we're gonna take this to council or not.
CAC?
Council Advisory Committee. And then it goes to council, first reading, first time. Once they approved and they agree, then it goes to the second public engagement session, which is a public hearing. So The first one, public participation meeting, again, this is very, very early on in the process, right? We just get that application, we're throwing it out there. Now, after some refinement, reviews and whatnot, it's more solidified or finalized, so that we hold another public participation meeting for public hearing, to present more accurately what that development is really gonna look like. And then council either says yes or no, because at the second reading is when they either approve the DA or they don't. If they do, then a notice of approval is submitted in the newspaper, and the day that that is published is the day that the 14-day appeal period starts. So from that day of publication, there's a 14-day appeal period. There's dates on the side. This are the anticipated dates that if everything goes smoothly, you know, we're talking the end of March, that council approves, meaning that mid-March, it's all finalized. But of course, with revision, we need to talk to different departments, it might take a little longer to get, we have to draft the DA, legal review, things like that. But if all goes well, that is the projected timeline.
And just one quick question.
Of course.
I'm gonna backtrack. You mentioned the amenity space would be on the county side, right?
Yes.
So are their requirements the same as the town of Kentful's?
Okay, so that's a whole can of worms.
Let's open it up.
So believe it or not, the town of Kemple is the difficult one to deal with because they can actually build as of right.
Okay.
So they just need to apply for development permits and they got it. So as long as they meet the zoning requirements, which they do,
Mhm.
it's actually super simple on their end.
Okay.
But within the town of Kentville, the only path was to enter it through a DA. So they don't actually have to.
Okay. Okay.
They don't have to do the amenity space?
The county's doing it.
Now, to be fair, I cannot speak to their land use bylaw. I do not have jurisdiction to say that or to do that. I could be wrong. I have been wrong many, many, many times. But that would be, if you want a true answer, you would have to contact the county. But what I do know is that based off of this application and off of their land use bylaw, they can build as a permit.
So with our deal, there's not gonna be any, we're gonna bypass the amenity space requirement, I guess, right? We're not gonna put it in there. if I
I'm gonna
understand.
touch on the amenity
Okay.
space too, because it's not just the common area spaces,
Okay.
there's spaces for each unit as well.
Okay, all right, thank you, thanks.
I just have to live up by Hoover's Landing, and they basically paved it and put buildings in, and there's no green space, there's nothing.
Right.
And it's just,
Yeah.
it's gonna be so hot in the summer, it's gonna be unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is not what we're doing.
So yeah, so that's, I mean, that's ultimately the answer, is that is a different
Well, that's what you
development.
said, but what you do is what I'm worried about.
Well, when we enter into a DA, it's a legally binding document, so we have to do what we say we're
Yeah.
gonna do.
And who enforces it? And how is it enforced?
Through bylaw officers, development officers, inspections throughout the entire process.
And they could require you to take something down
Yep.
and put it out?
Absolutely.
Has that ever happened?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And also, to be fair, I think this is the first development agreement that the town of Kentville has entered in 6 years or something like that. So it's not the most common in town of Kentville, but the process of a development agreement is very, very common. So yes, there's no denying that enforcement has been done through development agreements many times previously.
Just a little taken aback of just how dense it is there with the kids, there's nothing, the dogs, there's nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, Elizabeth is gonna talk more about this one and how it's not equal, pretty much, right? Okay, so that's that. Again, I'm not gonna go through all of this, because it's, yeah. Well, no, this is just to show like examples. We do have to consider wastewater management or stormwater, but then we also have to look at compatibility with the neighboring, properties, right? So it's just a big array of criteria that needs to be reviewed, right? It's actually not a 5-minute thing. And if you look on that column, there are quite a few different departments that need to be involved. So we got Public Works, we got Traffic, DO, Director of Planning, Director of Recreation, and then there's even Finance. So we're talking soil. So again, it's a pretty comprehensive list of criteria that needs to be reviewed. And then this is IM 12, so what council can request. It is a little weird because stormwater and servicing are part of it anyway. But other examples, traffic, landscaping, streetscape. I think that's it on my end. So I know that was a lot. I get that. So hopefully it's gonna be more exciting when Elizabeth,
Quick question.
Yes.
How big's the parcel of land that we're talking that is within town of Kent?
it's a great
How many
question.
acres, how many hectares, like, what's the size of the parcel?
It's almost 6 acres, between the town and county, I believe.
I think
The
as a
entire
whole.
piece is
As a
about 6
whole.
acres?
Yeah,
1,200 feet.
It's less than half of that for.
yeah, it's about 40% of that.
Or about 40%.
5.97.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's put up yours.
So just while he's pulling that up, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of backstory on this property. It is owned by VIDA Living. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with VIDA. They're a relatively new group who have been focusing on affordable rentals throughout the Maritimes, and they've actually acquired a few properties in Manitoba, but they look after sort of older Class B rental, renovate them and basically just enhance them from a community perspective. So some of their pillars are security, again, community, and safety for their tenants. And so this is their first kick at being a developer. They've never built anything, they've acquired over the last number of years, and so this is their first attempt at development. And this site specifically, we actually, I don't work for VIDA, I'm a consultant for them, so I'm a contractor, but I'm here to represent them tonight because, again, because they're not a builder or developer, they wanted to make sure that they had somebody helping to guide that process. So over a year ago now, they actually had an approved development agreement on this property for an even more dense version of this site plan. So there was just under 100 units with a variety of product types. So it wasn't an apartment building, it was, you know, duplexes and triplexes and row homes. They felt that it might be too dense for the area, for a rural community. And again, given that it was their first kick at development, they wanted to kind of scale it back a little bit. So they went through an international design process, sort of a competition that they put out to design students, and ultimately came back with this iteration of the site plan. So almost half the amount of units, but based on further research that they did of the demographic in the area, so they had surveyed folks in the area. You may or may not have seen some of those surveys come through. I'm not sure how they dispersed that. But the information that they got back indicated that people weren't necessarily looking just for affordable rentals. They were also looking for affordable homeownership options. And so looking at, you know, the company's vision for the future, they decided to go with this site plan option. So they're single units rather than row homes or apartments or duplexes. Everybody has their own front door, and it's, you know, everybody can purchase their own unit. But the way that they're gonna go about this is through a condo corporation. So it's a little unique. A lot of people, when you hear condo, they think of an apartment building, and you pay condo fees to, you know, keep the lights on in the common areas, clean the common areas, etc. This is sort of like a pocket neighborhood or a cottage cluster. There's lots of sort of interesting titles to put on this kind of development. But basically the way that the condo corporation will be registered is that each individual owns their home. They own a portion of the property that the home is on. But then there's also common areas, so walkways, parking spaces, and that sort of thing. I'll get into a little bit more detail on that once I pull the site plan up, because it'll just be a little bit easier to explain. So you guys saw this. This is where the subject site is in relation to the hospital and other areas that you're familiar with. So up at the top of this site plan, you can see that there is a little bit of a legend there that gives you the unit types. So there are right now 3 different unit types, and I will bring them up as renderings in a second. But again, you'll see that there's 2 access points on the property. So there's an entry here and up here. And this basically provides both the residents a loop to come through the site, but it's also obviously for fire access, snow clearing, garbage collection, all that kind of stuff. Those are details that'll get sort of sussed out as we move along, but if this is in fact going to be a condo corporation, garbage collection, snow removal, all of that would be taken care of by the condo corporation, so it wouldn't be up to the town or county to take over that service for these property owners. You can see that the parking is along the drive aisle, and again, just to speak to some of the common areas of the community, there's a large green space in the center of the site, there's pickleball courts, and then some of the other notes just denote the existing structures that are in the area. So these are apartment buildings that are the neighboring properties. There's some single family behind here and to the other side of the property. There's a little bit of landscaping on this site plan, but by no means is it complete. The landscape plan will be much more detailed than this, again, sort of speaking to where we can delineate what is common area and what will be, you know, this person's front yard that they get to plant and do what they want with, and how that sort of transitions into common area pathways for all of the residents to use. This here is a stormwater management pond or area. We're, you know, going through engineering right now to understand what that's going to look like. But basically, in order to not disrupt sort of the natural swale that runs through this property, and we don't end up, you know, with too much asphalt that makes water pour out onto neighboring properties. This is how we're retaining the water within the site, is through this storm pond, and just trying not to disrupt anything outside of the existing area. It's one of the unique things about sort of infill development is trying to bring something new without having too much impact on the neighbors, both the residents as well as the land itself. So this is one of the unit types. It's a bungalow. It's just under 900 square feet, and it offers a 2-bedroom option for somebody. The size of these units was, again, based on some of those surveys as well as just general market research to understand what it is that households are looking for now. So again, the intent was not only from an architectural perspective and a neighborhood perspective to make the site unique and not look like just one unit type. These 3 unit types were really, you know, it was a thoughtful design process giving size and option and price range really to the end user. This is another option. So again, just over 1,000 square feet. Uh-oh, wonder if he wants to join us. So it's a slightly larger unit. Again, it's 2-bedroom, but another sort of key piece of the criteria that VIDA put out to the folks that ended up helping with the design was that sustainability and accessibility, along with affordability, was something that was really important. So the construction of these units, the layout of these units, you know, it was all really well thought through, and will continue as we move through the design development. But again, sort of being able to accommodate the needs of the folks who engaged in the process thus far. And so here is the final floor plan or product type. This is a 2-story, the only 2-story unit on the site. And yeah, it gives the homeowner a carport, sort of garage type scenario, which is pretty unique. As you saw on the site plan, there is parking throughout, so we're required to give 1 space to each resident, and we're actually in excess of that number on the site. We wanted to make sure that we provided space for visitors, and you know, if a household has more than 1 car, then they're accommodated. So this is obviously not an accessible unit where it's 2 stories, but just a third option. So a lot of the time when people look at site plans, you know, if you don't have a development background or architecture background, you're like, this is great, but it doesn't look like much to me. So I think it's really important at the early stages to try to develop renderings that sort of give a 3D image of what the community interface could look like. So the next few slides are really just providing that. So this isn't necessarily what it will exactly look like. You can see that these homes aren't the products that I just showed you, but they were placeholders to be able to provide an idea of what that drive aisle will look like, how we'll buffer it with landscaping, how the units, you know, will interface with each other, as well as, you know, being able to depict what's your landscape area, what's general landscape area. Again, those details will continue to be developed, but this just gives you a better understanding visually. You know, even the parking, we've talked about parking treatments, like people don't necessarily want multi-residential development to be overtook by parking, right? It is a requirement that we put it because people are still very dependent on vehicles, but it shouldn't take over, I think, the integrity of the community. And this is really what VIDA is trying to do, is develop a community here. So lots of thought into the pavement, the landscaping, and ultimately on the architecture as well. So here's another view in between units. So you know, one thing that I've seen a lot of these types of developments is people are calling them cottage courts. So again, they're kind of smaller, but again, that's the feedback that a lot of market research is giving, is that people don't want a 2,000 square foot home. They want a 900 square foot home or a 1,500 square foot home at most. And so even though these are adjacent to each other, and some people might feel like they're really close, the reason why we're doing that is to really push a sense of community. So even though you're in your own home and you have your 4 walls and you can close your door and you don't have to speak to your neighbor, it's still nice to have the option that you have shared space where you can integrate with your community and you can, you know, get to know your neighbor next door.
So they were all pre-sold, right? Like there's none of them that are rentals?
That's correct, yeah. In terms of like a sales program, that's yet to be determined. Like, are we gonna try to sell 50% before we start construction? I don't know, that's not, you know, it's 55 units, so in my opinion, as a development professional, we will phase this, both for a construction reason, but also when we start moving people in here, trying to lessen the impact on them as they live in an active site as it builds out. But yeah, again, like it doesn't really speak to the architecture so much, but you know, it gives you a sense that you know, it's very intentional. Like we're not just plopping units in here. We want to make sure that there's a good mix and mixture so that there's a wide range of potential homeowners in this tiny neighborhood. So I really like this one where you can sort of see down through the units. You know, if I were to surmise based on my experience, this would likely be, you know, area that was yours, that you maintained, but the connectivity on the sidewalks through sort of more general areas would be condo corp and looked after that way. But again, those are kind of details that the owner will decide once they register the condo corp, which is a whole other process after we get through the development agreement process. This is a beautiful winter scene with all of the greenery getting killed on the first snow, I guess. But again, we obviously have to consider those things too. Like when we looked at this site plan, we look at those larger items, like snow clearing. How is the site gonna function when people are actually living here? And so ensuring that we have areas for snow clearing, ensuring we have areas for mail collection, garbage collection, all that kind of stuff was really considered, so that it is enjoyable for neighboring properties, like you're not worried about that sort of thing if you're a neighbor, but also obviously maintaining the value of all 56 units, all 56 homes throughout this small community. So that gives you another look at in between the units. You know, this is sort of a tighter look. Not all of them are this close. But again, once we get into building permit phase and looking at the construction of these units, things like limiting distance and protection against fire and all that kind of stuff will be considered. And that's just another look.
Or did you say they were type 5B?
Sorry?
Type 5 being the wood frame, non-protected for fire side things, or wood frame, lightweight construction?
Well, we haven't determined that yet, to be quite honest.
I thought I noticed one of your slides was type B.
Yeah, and the architect may have noted it that way, but we've been talking about a variety of different construction types for this. You know, again, sort of touching back on one of the, I guess, pillars of this community design was to try to be sustainable both environmentally and from a construction perspective, but also financially for the health of the condo corporation down the road. So just looking at ultimately what the best solution is for all of those pieces. Is concrete construction, does that make sense for a one unit, sort of 800 square foot property? Not sure, but it might make sense for 56 of them. So yeah, we're looking through that as a next step. Yeah.
These are all like slab, right?
Yes, yeah.
So for somebody who lives on Nichols Avenue, just so I can picture this right, so Nichols Avenue goes up here, is these trees so is it like?
Let's go back to the aerial.
Yeah.
Where's your house? I'm just kidding.
Property line, and I live on the last one, so that site is right in my backyard.
Yeah, so you can kind of see the residential units that go along Nicholas Avenue, right? So it does abut those backyards. And actually one thing that we've already kind of touched on and we'll continue to touch on is that buffering. Like what does that look like? Is that a fence? Is that trees? Is it both? Yeah.
So the pictures there, their backyard is essentially beside my backyard, and then another road.
Well, what we tried to do was face the short side of the units. So the sides of these units would be, like these are the single family homes here. So their backyards, it's their side yard that would be abutting those residential rear yards. So you're not staring out, I mean, that's what it is in single family anyways. You stare at each other's backyards sometimes, but it would be a side yard.
That dotted line, sorry, is my backyard, I guess.
Oh, sorry, which dotted
That
line?
dotted line on the left.
Dotted line on the left is your backyard. Yeah. So this would be a side yard.
Okay.
Front door would be, you'd get out of your vehicle, walk up the central sidewalk and go to your unit, right?
How many feet between buildings and in between that
Sure.
two buildings?
It's a range, just to accommodate the grading of the site, but it's between 12 and 20 feet. Sorry, do you mean here or here?
I mean both.
Yeah, so it varies, but there's about 15 feet in between here. And then again, these kind of vary, but it would be, double
30.
or more. Yeah.
No way there's 30 feet here. And I'm wondering how close they come to the property line there. Again, it looks like
They're beyond the setback requirement,
which was 20 feet, 20,
right?
so they're less than 20 feet from the property line.
No, they're more than 20 feet between units, so from property line to unit, but in between units, it does shorten in some of the areas. In other areas, it's more where we could accommodate it. But yeah, at no point do we encroach within the required setback area.
Which they said they were gonna dispense with.
I think that's because, and correct me if I'm wrong, because there was no definition for that multi-unit neighborhood or community, it's,
There was a slide up there with things that would normally be enforced that will not be enforced for this particular development.
right, we had this conversation before. It would be if you're, so based on the zoning right now, you could have 2 units on this site. And they would have to be, the second unit would have to be more than 15 feet away from the first one. So if we did not go in through the DA, we could have all of those units up there on the county side would remain, and then there would be 2 units on this side. And it was confusing for me, and I'm trying to speak their language, but basically it was saying that your main building would have to be in excess of 15 feet from that second building, making it a multi-site. So that's what we're looking to soften on or relax on from the definition, right? Because in not all areas do we meet that definition for the 2 units. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm not making sense. Do you do a better job of that?
Between the property owner's, property on the left and the start of, one of the homes in that subdivision, that would have to be 20 feet, right?
Yes, and we've accommodated that. What we haven't accommodated is the 20 feet between units within the site.
No, I was asking about the backyard.
Oh, sorry, yes, no, we're not relaxing on that. We can't, it's also a building code requirement.
And the fire department is quite happy with the distance between them, if one catches fire, it won't burn in the next one?
They'll be a part of the review process. Yeah, it's, where this is the initial site plan, right? Like it hasn't gone through all of the process yet, but they will review that. And that sort of kicks back to our conversation about constructability,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Can I ask, how wide are these houses?
Yeah, we can go back to the renderings themselves.
I can't.
Yeah, so no problem. This unit is 16 feet by 57 feet. So that gives you just under 900.
I was just wondering how wide they were.
Yeah, I think that's the most narrow one. Oh no, yeah, that one's 18 feet by 58. And then that one is 16 feet. Yeah, by 52, but 2 stories. So they're quite narrow. Yes?
Garbage storage.
Sure. So this is a conversation. Do we have 1 garbage collection or 2 garbage collection areas within the site, or do we do individual pickup? That's something that we're gonna suss out. But again, because it's a condo corporation, it would end up having to be private garbage collection. So yeah, it's something that we have to kind of decide down the road, but in the past, I mentioned the earlier development agreement that we had done, there was a common building here and a common building where the pickleball courts are, those 2 brown rectangles. And those were like a garbage and recycling area for all the residents to bring their garbage to, and then it would be collected from there. But we haven't quite decided on that yet. We're gonna see how the site plan ends up, but either way, it would be private collection, same thing with snow clearing and all that kind of stuff.
It's a lot of garbage.
Certainly, yeah.
Just a question
Yeah.
about the pickleball courts.
Yeah.
You might want to rethink that.
Okay.
Because they are very noisy in a residential area.
Sure,
So you might want to go with tennis or something else, but they should rethink that.
okay. Pickleball is just so hot right now.
It is. If you go into the city and they're in a residential area, people are all upset about them because they're so noisy.
Right,
So it's better to have a buffer between them, which is quite large. like
Sure.
Out in a park somewhere.
yep,
But you could put something else there that would be,
Mhm.
tennis would be better.
yep. Yeah, like we tossed around lots of ideas, community gardens, dog park area, all that kind of stuff. This isn't written in stone, it's just, we wanted to make sure we're taking into account the amenity space, which brings me to an earlier point. I hope I kind of touched on it when I was looking at the units, but as mentioned, the amenity space the majority of it is within the county boundary, which to us doesn't mean a whole lot. We're consolidating these two parcels into one. We're gonna treat it all as the same neighborhood. However, in saying that, those front porches, front entryways, when we do go through our detail landscape design, we'll be providing homeowners with their own individual amenity spaces too. So it might be a front patio, it might be a back patio. But, you know, the common area amenity spaces are here on this plan right now. Again, they might adjust. But the landscape area throughout the site, there will be, as we register the condo, there will be, each unit of the condo will have the building as well as some amenity space. Yep.
Hi. Is there any plan for, I guess, the property line on the left for, like, is there any like trees, fence, anything like that?
Yeah, so definitely, that's something that has already sort of been highlighted. How do we treat that interface? Is it a fence? Is it landscaping? Is it both? We cleared the site last year, or more than a year ago now, actually, and left some trees there. Those were left based on the previous iteration of the site plan with the 99 units. And so we're just looking now to see, you know, what trees are existing that can stay with this site plan, and how do we landscape based on this version. So fencing and trees, all that kind of stuff will be considered then. And you know, the town has already highlighted that it's something that we need to consider is buffering with so many residents, right? How do we buffer noise and lights and all that kind of stuff so that it doesn't impact the existing neighbors? Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I'm just gonna take a quick look at my notes. The VIDA, the project manager for this, this project for VIDA, hurt his back and he can't sit in a vehicle. So I just wanna make sure that I didn't miss anything that was important from his perspective. No, I don't think so. So yeah, we're very preliminary on this. Not so much from our team's perspective. We've been working on this site for a number of years now, and like I said, we've gone through a few different versions. But we're preliminary in the application process, and I'm really happy to see that people showed up here tonight. Sometimes we don't get people who show up, and we do genuinely want to hear from you. You know, it impacts you directly, so.
What's your target household? Who are you expecting to buy the buildings? Like seniors, young couples, big families, immigrants? Who are you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Those surveys came back, and the market research came back, and it was a good mix. I would suggest that young professionals was a large group, and downsizers was actually a large group too, and hence why we made sure that the bungalow units are accessible. Yeah, they are. So the turning radiuses are there, and then when we look more at the construction details, we'll look at universal design, so putting in grab rails and all that kind of stuff.
And I noticed in your pictures of the housing there,
Yeah.
there were steps, which would be impossible in
Right.
a wheelchair, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we move through the grading plan, which is one of the engineering plans that we need to look at, where we can eliminate steps, we definitely will be specifically to those units. And otherwise we look at stuff like ramps and that sort of thing.
And the pictures of the actual buildings,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of look ugly. Is that what's really gonna be there, or is that just a?
It's the feedback that we received is how we instructed the architect from a design perspective. Certainly, there's room for continued feedback, but from a constructability perspective, as well as what we heard from, you know, these focus groups was that they wanted to see more modern design.
That looks like
all comes back, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not the architect, so.
Yeah, and they're gonna be well-built, well-insulated, draft-free and all that stuff, right? That's part of the.
Yeah,
part
yeah.
of anything?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, VIDA is a new company, as I mentioned, relatively new. This is their first attempt at building right from scratch. And so that's why they went back and did it a second time. They want to make sure that what they're presenting is something that they'll be proud of down the road and that they can sort of continue to grow on with their brand. So from a reputation perspective, it's important that it's built really well. But ultimately, the biggest thing is for the homeowners, right? Is to make sure that we're taking all of it into consideration from a timing perspective. Everybody knows we're in a housing crisis. We need to get them out there. So we're looking at modular building and panelization and all that fun stuff. But we're also looking at, these people are gonna move into this house. They could be there for 25 years. They could be there forever. And just sort of keeping that really good experience throughout. So yeah, from a construction perspective, they'll be right and tight.
What about, people are trying to get less cars and that, what about accessibility for walkers? Like
Right.
to get to downtown, is there gonna be sidewalks available going down O'Dean to the sidewalk at the corner of James and O'Dean, or no?
So once we go outside of our site, I can't really speak to that. However, we are like pedestrian connectivity with the existing neighborhood is definitely something that we're taking into consideration through the landscape plan. And
That's
so,
a lot of people.
yeah, definitely. How do they get out of that site? So again, like you'll see, once we get to a more developed site plan, you'll see the sidewalks in there. They bring people to their vehicles, they bring them out of the site, and they bring them to their units. So it's definitely something that we have to design into the site, yeah.
Do you have any idea on the price point of what the various homes would be?
I do not. I wish I did, but I don't. I'm not doing any of the financial feasibility for them, so I'm not privy to that. But I do know that it was based on, again, those focus groups, like what's the max that people want to spend.
Yeah. So they did ask that, yeah.
Oh god, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I mean, some of these focus groups happened prior to the decision to turn it from a rental project to home ownership. So rental rates and price point were definitely discussed, and then it's like reverse engineering, right? This is how much they want to spend. What does that look like from a size, like to construct it? How much is that going to cost? And is that financially viable for the company and then ultimately for the condo corporation to maintain as well in the future?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a couple written,
Oh,
if everyone
yes,
wants
please.
to take a pause at least.
Okay.
These are actually from Carol Stevens from 23 Nichols Avenue. She submitted her questions via email to me. So firstly, this is on her behalf. Firstly, I want to express my appreciation for the work that VIDA Living does to provide much needed affordable housing. Below are my questions to be read this evening. Here we go. These homes back up almost to the property line, at least 2 and up to 3 homes deep. Will each unit have outdoor storage? My concern is buildup of materials due to lack of storage. Where will residents store large items such as winter tires, garbage, and green carts?
Yeah, that's something that we considered in the design. Certainly it'll be looked after in that 3rd unit that has the carport. There's some sort of intentional storage conversation there. And sort of back to the architecture comment, looking at these units and how do we integrate storage into them for not necessarily just like your interior stuff, but your lawnmower and that kind of stuff. Hopefully people won't need that in this community. But it's definitely something that we're looking into because these units don't have basements. But there is quite a bit of storage within the units themselves. I know that probably doesn't mean a whole lot when you're looking at it from a 2D perspective. But with the exception of this one and the second one, these will have attic space for storage. And yeah, so it's definitely something that we are talking about already. can take into consideration, for sure.
Noted. Second question from Carol. Many people currently cut across the church and other private properties from the apartment buildings on Hartlen Court and Oakdean Avenue to get to Nichols Avenue.
Okay.
With the significant increase in population due to this development, will there be a fence along the property line to deter this?
Okay, well, that's good to know, like, we don't live here, so I don't live here, so I didn't know that. Yeah, that's a good feedback to have.
I think your diagram showed a wooden fence.
Yeah, we do have a fence on the site plan, but we just don't know what it looks like. Like, is it gonna be something that is more soft so that people can come through the site? Or is it gonna be something that really delineates this is private property? We'd like to see a mix of that because we don't necessarily.
Back to that slide for a second.
Yep. We don't necessarily want to have it feel like it's its own island. You know, we definitely want to integrate into the community. But it's hard to predict how people will use the site, so that's really good information to have. Yeah.
So when you build a unit, you have to build the code, and what we're looking for here is permission to get away from, I can't say building code, but from normal expectations of distance between properties. Does that change the code for the building? I'm thinking about sound ratings. If there's a specific rating, like I can't say it's CFM, it's something else. I was just looking at it the other day.
Yeah.
But when you have a high density neighborhood like this, does the building code change according to how many people you're putting in there? You have a sound rating requirement?
It certainly can, like sound rating often comes into effect when you're talking about multi-residential buildings, right? The bigger thing here is fire protection, which would be above and beyond an STC rating, which is that sound transmission, so does that kind of answer your question? Like we're certainly aware of that. Unit or window placement was even a part of the conversation when they were designing the units. So yes, in short, yes, it's all considered, but building code doesn't necessarily change for this type of unit. But again, like I said earlier, we're still not 100% sure on the construction type of this. Like if we went concrete, it would be a totally different rating than if it was wood frame. So certainly aware of that though. Like my background is entirely multi-residential. I have heard all of the complaints that can happen in multi-residential communities, whether it's apartments or townhomes or this. People parking and pets seem to be the top 3 Ps, but sound is definitely a huge part of that too. So yeah, definitely considered.
The building code review comes later on in the process, should this go forward as well.
Yeah.
So they'll have their own review of this design to make sure everything works for them before it can continue. And they're given permits.
Yeah. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, like I said, I'm really happy to see the turnout. Feel like feedback is great. But just to reiterate, there was a lot of thought put into this design. This type of like cottage court or pocket neighborhood is relatively new to the Maritimes, Atlantic Canada. But speaking to my own personal experience, it's very common out west. And it just allows, really, my bread and butter is affordable housing, and it allows developers to provide a variety of product type options at a more affordable price point, while also maintaining the integrity of a community development. And that was really the drive behind what VIDA wanted to do here. It's a huge site. They could have asked to put an apartment building here, and they just didn't want to do that because it's not the right thing to do for the community. But the community certainly needs housing, and so that's how we landed here after a few attempts. So I really appreciate everybody's time tonight and appreciate your feedback, genuinely. And VIDA's first kick at being a developer, and I think they want to be a developer for a while. So they certainly don't want to have the reputation of you know, a heating pad apartment building. Yeah, more of a community vibe for sure. So thanks everybody, and I guess we'll see you at the next steps, next public hearing, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more detail and can answer a lot more questions.
I always need last word. Just, so if there are any additional questions, you can contact me. We'll be moving through this process. It's not a quick process. We need time to review. Council needs a time to review what's being proposed. So there's always an opportunity to get in touch with us at Town Hall. And I didn't bring my cards with me, but I am on the website and available at any time if there's any questions or discussions needed. So, all right, thanks everyone for coming out, and have a good night.
If they stay with you, there's one part way in, one part way out.
Question? Okay, there we go.
So just from totally fire perspective, sure. I know my hydrants are by the entrance.
Right.
By that driveway, there's one by the other driveway. I see this diagram, and I can hide it. Other kids, like private hydrant in the development. Because I believe a lot of apartment buildings, yeah, look at it, that Kentfield Estates. I know there's hydrants on those locations, but I see they're put in by.
Yeah, like we talked about, like obviously sidewalks, but site plans, right, and how should
That being 6 acres.
site in a way that's not disruptive to review and neighbors, but.
Yeah.
Right. Of course, if we're looking at $50,000, that's a 600.
Yes.
We're looking at.
Depends on the size of the house.
That's cool, like maybe when we do.
I think this is, this one,
I don't know if
has to be on, the way, things like this don't want to.
No, I know, I know they're.
I know it's private, I don't know if it's
Yeah, it's a fun for engineers to make this all, but just something to consider. It's something else.
Hello, so it's definitely like
There's residential type A, type C, right? Type C would be.
I just wonder if she didn't mean like height as in building material type, it's just, that's the residential.
Oh, and that's basically type S.
So this is what model A looks like, instead of model B.
Okay.
So it's not.
Well, my fire, when I start getting type.
Yes, exactly, and I think she meant model instead of type.
Okay, that.